Welcome to virtual worship at the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. I'm Terry Beery, and I'm a member of the congregation. Our minister, John Conlon, is taking some time off for study and planning, and he will return on 8/31. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person and support a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are in your life's journey, you are welcome here. I'd like to extend a special welcome to anyone who's joining us for the first time. To learn more about our church, as well as opportunities to connect during the week, check our website, our Facebook page, or sign up for our email announcements. You can contact our church office for more information. The contact information is on our website at uulosalamos.org and in the service notes below. If you're watching on Sunday morning, we invite you to join our Zoom coffee hour after the service at 11. The information for that was sent out in an email announcement and is on our Facebook page. Whether you're visiting for the first time or you've been part of the congregation for years, may this time set apart from our everyday concerns help us see what is most important to us in ourselves, in each other, and in the world around us. I'd like to read a poem called Struggle and Joy by Vance Bass. Each day brings struggles. Each day brings joy. Each day brings us the opportunity to ease the struggle of another, to be the joy in another's life. May this flame remind us to carry our light to each other and to the world. Each week brings joys and sorrows to our lives. We may come here today with our hearts soaring with joy, or our hearts heavy with sorrow. The loss of our ability to visit in person with cherished friends or family, or the challenges of world events. These can weigh heavily upon us and leave us with a sense of sorrow. But we may also come here today with joy in our hearts. Joy at the sound of a rippling stream or the laughter of dear family members on video calls. We may find joy in a hike through the forest or in looking out over a canyon. Let us take a moment now, as 2 candles burn in our sanctuary, to bring to our minds and hearts the sorrows and joys that we carry with us, whether spoken aloud or held quietly and tenderly within. Today we are pleased to be joined by 3 speakers. Our first is Beverly Clinton. What does a Marine, a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a nationally certified court reporter, both voice and stenotypist, an entrepreneur, an FBI Citizens Academy graduate have in common? The intersectionality converges when they all meet and converge to be our speaker, Beverly Clinton. Our second speaker is Vaughn Clinton. Vaughn is a U.S. Navy disabled veteran with 13.5 years of service. Frocked E6, which is wearing the rank but not getting paid. He served on the USS DuPont DD-941, the USS Semmes DDG-18, the USS Carr FFG-52 as a naval fire controlman. Vaughn is the father of 3 sons, and he's married to a U.S. Marine, Beverly Clinton, for almost 31 years. A military brat, his father retired the same year that he joined in 1979. Vaughn has 6 siblings, an older sister who's in the Army, a brother who's 13 months younger than he is, who's also in the Army, a baby brother who's 16.5 years younger whose retired army 4 out of her 6 siblings served. The younger sisters used their smarts. Vaughn was born in South Carolina but grew up around the world. 3 years in France, 3 years in Spain, 2 in Portugal, 3 years in California, lots of world travel courtesy of the U.S. Navy. He graduated from Camden High in Camden, South Carolina. Our last speaker is our own Tyler Taylor. Tyler grew up near Birmingham, Alabama, but went to college in Virginia and fell in love with it and the Blue Ridge Mountains. So after going to medical school and getting trained as a family medical doctor, he enjoyed living and practicing in a small town in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. In 2000, he and his family moved to Los Alamos in search of even more beauty and adventure. They have not been disappointed. His only child is Maura Taylor, the joy of Tyler's life, and she will be our solo vocalist for 2 songs today. We are so pleased that Maura is joining us this morning and sharing her beautiful voice for this special service. Welcome to all of our guests.
People around here don't know what it means to suffer at the hands of our American dreams. They turn their backs on the grisly scenes, traced to the privileged sons. They got their God and they got their guns, got their armies and the chosen ones, but we'll all be burning in the same big sun when the great correction comes. Down the ages, lovers of the mystery, they've been saying, people, let your love light shine. Poets and sages all throughout history say the light burns brightest in the darkest times. It's the bitter end we've come down to, the eye of the needle that we gotta get through.
Hi, everybody. I have a story for you today. It's called The Parting of the Waters, and it was written by Chris Bice. While you're listening to this story, I want you to think about the word freedom. So, freedom is an interesting word, and it means kind of different things to some different people. So, what I'd like you to do is to think about what freedom means to you. Think about it while we're doing the story, but think about it for the other parts of the service as well. Because I think it'll keep coming back, and it's an important thing to think about and to understand. In Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963, there were some children who wanted to be free. They were tired of being shut out of some restaurants and swimming pools and playgrounds because of the color of their skin. They were tired of being treated unfairly because they were Black. These children had heard about a man named Martin Luther King Jr., who was leading a march to protest the unfair treatment of Blacks. These children went and told Dr. King that they wanted to march for freedom. Dr. King frowned because he knew that these marches were dangerous. Sometimes the police dogs would attack freedom marchers. Sometimes the freedom marchers would be beaten with clubs. And sometimes the police would turn on high-powered fire hoses and knocked people down to the ground. Dr. King did not want to let the children march because he feared for their safety. But when he looked into their eyes, he could see the light of freedom. He knew that these children would march even if he said no. And so he said, "I'd be happy to have you march for freedom." And on May 5th, 1963, 3,000 young people filled the streets to march for freedom. There were children from 6 to 16 years old walking side by side. But up ahead, they could see a line of police officers that were blocking the street. There was a man on a megaphone saying, "There will be no march today. I order you to turn back now." And the children could see that the police had clubs and that they had mean-looking dogs on the end of leashes. They could also see some men carrying high-powered fire hoses. At that moment, they began to ask themselves, should we turn back? But in the back of the children's minds, there was a story that they had heard many times. It was the story of Moses and how he led the Hebrew people out of slavery to the shores of the Red Sea. "Now what do we do?" the people had asked Moses. "Pharaoh and his soldiers are right behind us, and this great big Red Sea is in front of us. Where can we go? Should we turn back?" Moses had taken a few minutes to kneel and pray. Then he stood up and he held his head high and he began to sing. "Ain't gonna let no Red Sea turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no Red Sea turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching into freedom land." And Moses had walked forward and stepped into the Red Sea, and the waters parted, and there was a wall of water to the left of him and a wall of water to the right of him, and Moses and his people walked to the other side with dry ground under their feet. The children of Birmingham remembered the story of Moses, and it gave them hope. They knew that they too had come way too far to turn back now. And so they began marching forward toward the line of police. And the man with the megaphone could see that the children would not turn back, so he shouted to his police officers, "Turn on the fire hose! Unleash the dogs!" But there was only silence. harmed. There was a line of police to the left and a line of police to the right, and many of them had tears in their eyes. For on that day, love conquered hate, and the children of Birmingham moved closer to the promised land of freedom, simply because they had courage and faith and wouldn't let nobody turn them around.
Pilgrimage. A new monument was dedicated in Montgomery. Built by the Equal Justice Initiative, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Founded by visionary Bryan Stevenson, the Equal Justice Initiative strives to end mass incarceration and excessive punishment, to challenge racial and economic injustice, to protect basic human rights for the most vulnerable. 4 months from the dedication, I departed my home on a mountainside and descended into the deep south. Beginning my pilgrimage to the sacred site, I entered Selma. Walking the streets through history, encountering murals and monuments to fallen martyrs. Crossing the Pettus Bridge, peaceful on this Sunday morn, tracing the march of Lewis and King to Montgomery. I entered the memorial in the rain. Confronted by a shackled group, they were convulsed by anger and anguish. They displayed their humanity. Beyond the shackled looms the memorial to those who were later lynched and terrorized. Their iron tombstones hang from the ceilings. Their stories line the walls. As I walked, I descended. As I walked, tombstones ascended among the plaques that record the crimes. Crimes continue to this day, even as I turn to leave. Maya Angelou said, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again."
Don't you know we're talking about a revolution? It sounds like a whisper. you know they're talking about a revolution. It sounds like a whisper. And finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Oh no, 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 talking about a revolution. Oh no.
Did you know that 93% of communication is nonverbal? So that means that the other 7% is actually the words that you say. The main messages that I received growing up in the South were very clearly that they were all unspoken. They were the unspoken codes which all dealt with and pointed to you knowing your place. You could excel, but know that there was always going to be a target on your back for choosing to do that. Your place in the world is that of servitude and accepting that place, never questioning that. What stuck out for me was, again, as a person of color, never to ask for help, never to expect that support. One of the earliest lessons that I received on that was my grades showed that I had an aptitude for math. And as a result of that, I remember being put into a classroom, and I was also keenly aware that I was the only child of color there. I also remember the teacher absolutely not acknowledging my space or place in that classroom, never providing support for me in that classroom. And as a result, I requested to be moved back to a lower classroom because that's where I felt comfortable. There was nothing there that made me feel out of place. Being in that classroom affirmed for me that I didn't fit in, and nor did I belong. And as a result of that, again, I regressed back into this day. I have a math phobia. I still just don't do well with it. So that's one of the earliest lessons that I learned. And when I think about what did I have to unlearn, I think for me it was always an innately knowing that there were pieces of the puzzle that were missing. For me, finding those pieces came together when I left South Carolina and joined the military. It was also innately being affirmed to know that I was right, because when I left California, my first duty station was in Southern California. And I spent my formative years, almost 10 years in California, and that's where I chose to go back to school to become a court reporter. And the only profession that has a higher dropout rate is that of brain surgeons. 98% of court reporters don't make it. So I chose a profession that was extremely hard, and yet I was able to do it. And that was, again, because innately I knew that I had the capacity to do more. And that's what I did. That would not have been affirmed in South Carolina. When I think about coming out, I think I've always been out, which is why it was always clear to me that I never fit in. My husband has memories, I think, back until when he was 2 years old. I can't remember anything happening or any memory standing out. The first memory I had clearly was knowing that I didn't fit in, knowing that I didn't belong. So I've always called it out, even if I didn't know the words for it. Another story that stands out in my mind is we would send our sons home for the summer, and I remembered signing our children up for a basketball camp. And one of my sons saying to me that he had been basically bullied. So I asked him to show me the child, and I went to the parent of the child, and I said that, we needed to talk about our children. And I remember that man, a white child, looking at me as though, who did I think I was, saying that his child needed to have any conversations at all with my child about their behavior. And it took me a while, but now I'm clear that behaviors are not the same thing as an inheritance. Sometimes people inherit behaviors, but that was a learned behavior that father was teaching his child about my child, in that my child didn't matter as much as his. So there was no conversation for us to have. And like I said, this was back in the 90s. So still very fresh in South Carolina coding that Black lives, or my life for that matter, doesn't matter. Am I optimistic? I am. I think it's the evolution of our change. It will happen. People are people. Everything else, again, is a learned behavior. It's something that's been passed down, and we've either chosen to accept it or we've chosen to question it and choose something different. In these last 4 years, I think we've all had to choose something different because we've not had the solace of resting in our ignorance and saying that we didn't know. I think everything has been so blatant that if you choose not to acknowledge where we are as a country, then you're just not choosing that. And that's, again, a choice. I can't tell you what's right or wrong for you, but I can say that in the last 4 years, we've had everything so in our face and so upfront that if you're not choosing to get engaged, then you're just choosing to stay as it is. And I don't think that's going to continue. I think we're going to make changes. I think we're going to begin to see the inherent worth of people. And I do believe that eventually, maybe not in my lifetime, racism and all of its insidious tendrils will be, the grip will be loosened and we'll all be better for it.
Hello, my name is Vaughn Clinton, and I was asked to give a little summary about my life growing up in the Deep South. Need to give you a little bit of background. So I am a military brat. I spent 18 years with my father in the U.S. Air Force and traveled all over the world. So I was kind of not accustomed to the Southern social norms of my generation. I'm about to turn 60, so I've seen a lot, been a lot of places, done a lot of things. Um, in my early childhood, I spent 3 years in France. It was let's see, from 1963 to 1965, 66, and I spoke fluent French. Went to French early childhood schools, and I had a lot of friends who were French speaking, and I had a lot of friends who were American dependents like myself, and so I was not introduced to the Southern social norms until later on in my life. So when my father returned from his assignment in France, he was transferred to Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. And this was around 66. And typically an assignment is 3 years, but there are variations on that thing. And so from 66 to roughly 69, we were stationed in California. And again, I was in a military community and wasn't necessarily exposed to the social norms because I didn't watch Walter Cronkite like my mother and father did at the time. But I do recall, I think I was roughly 7. See, yeah, I was 7 years old. And at the time, I had a brother who was 13 months younger than me and a sister who was born in France, as a matter of fact. So she was born in 65, so she was 4 years younger than me. And so in 68, She was about to turn 3 years old. And I remember one day chasing my brother through the house or something, that my mother was sitting on the front room sofa crying. For a 7-year-old to see his mother crying, you want to know, why is mommy crying? And so I asked, and she said nothing. And I remember her telling me it was nothing, baby. But when my father came home unexpectedly, and I remember that too, because he caught me and my brother jumping off the roof of the house. But that's another story. And they rushed us off to our rooms, and we weren't allowed to go out. And, I didn't understand it, but I remember my mom sobbing hard about it. 7, what is that now? Well, years later, she told me what it was. Martin Luther King had just gotten assassinated. And so by that time, I still was clueless. And to add to all of this, my brother and I spoke fluent French. We just lived in France for 3 years, and we had French playmates. So by this time, my father was getting assigned to somewhere in Southeast Asia. I think it was either Vietnam or Cambodia. I don't recall exactly. And tradition is we moved back to South Carolina. We moved close to family, his side and my mother's side. And the thing that I found, this is when I really got introduced to the Southern social norms. My brother and I, we did not speak with a Southern dialect. We did not have the traditional black Southern drawl or the country drawl of the day. Now, granted, I might have one now, but again, I'm 60. But at that point, my brother and I spoke English and French, and we would have conversations with each other on the school bus. And that got us into a lot of trouble. And we did not socially fit in this rural community because we signed up with the same school system my mother signed up with when she was a little girl back during the days of legal segregation. And my brother and I just did not thrive. We did not respond well. We fought all the time. The teachers were unsure about us because he got 2 young African American kids at the time speaking French. And they don't know what we're saying. So eventually, my maternal family decided that we were not going to do well in the school system. So they found a school in the city. We lived in the rural community at the time with no busing into the city. So all these elders of mine who had done retired came out of retirement and drove basically 30 miles every day to take me and my brother to a public school that was, for the South at that time, somewhat integrated. And we did not feel uncomfortable, though we were told by our elders what our community was expected us to behave. So we didn't talk much, just to each other, and we didn't talk French around each other. So that's a lost language to me now, by the way. Uh, Eventually, my father got assigned. He came back stateside, and we got assigned to Shaw Air Force Base, which is also in South Carolina. And we spent 3 years there, and pretty uneventful tour. And again, I'm around military brats like myself. The only color we always saw was green because our fathers were coming back and forth from Southeast Asia. And this was um, in the early to mid 70s. And eventually, sometime in there, my father got an accompanied assignment to Rota, Spain. And yes, at that time in my life, I spoke fluent Spanish too. Lost language to me now. I can still ask for a beer. But that was only a 2-year tour, and we came back stateside. And again, my father, this time, he got stationed in an Air Force base in North Carolina. But this time, he was eyeing retirement. And so he decided to stay in his hometown with the family. And my brother and I started, I had just finished, middle school, was going into my freshman year, completed my freshman year. And then my father got an assignment to Portugal, Azores, Portugal. And believe it or not, that was a relief because I was really not thriving in this social norm of know your place. I can't have this person as my friend, and it was just maddening to me. And then we moved to Azores, Portugal, and that was probably the best time of my life as a child because again I was around all military brats, all the branches, and we all had it was like 75, 76, and I was scheduled to graduate there. I had started my sophomore year there, and I was gonna graduate from there, and it was good, you know. And then my mother unfortunately got sick, and so we had to come back. She got medevac, and we came back, and we ended up back in South Carolina. And to say it didn't traumatize me would be an understatement. I didn't do well. I was so glad to leave South Carolina. And now that I'm almost 60 years old, I find myself trying to understand because, as a person of color who knows their white ancestors, I see them. I see them. And that's a story I could go deeply into, but I got to keep this short. But I wanted you to know that my experience uh, motivated me to leave South Carolina. And I hope you all get something out of this, and thank you so much. I hope you enjoy it.
Good morning. My childhood in Alabama began in a all-white maternity wing of a Birmingham hospital in 1950. Soon after came baptism in an all-white Presbyterian church. The separate but unequal pattern would be reinforced thereafter in 100 ways. See, I was not only white, but destined to grow up in a wealthy suburb. For the next 18 years, 99% of the black people I would see worked as maids, yardmen, and golf caddies. They were mysterious to me and considered of little consequence to all the adults I knew. This was just the unquestioned natural order. The big exception in my life was Cora Waldron, a black domestic worker in our house for 12 years. She was funny, hardworking, and affectionate to me. I was very fond of Cora, but in truth knew nothing of her life and took her for granted. But when she quit that job in 1964, the loss for me was hard. Though my parents' racist comments were mostly subdued and I was a sensitive kid, I still occasionally mouthed all the cruel tropes and insults regarding blacks. From my perspective, fitting in with friends was all that mattered. And what difference did my foul comments make anyway? You'd think I'd remember the 1963 bombing that killed 4 black girls in Birmingham in a church. Sickeningly, it was just part of the confusing backdrop and background noise for me. The stuff happening downtown that angered my mother, outside agitators edged on by Yankees, she would say. A small wake-up call came one Sunday in '65 when a black couple walked down the aisle and sat in the front pew of our all-white old downtown church. The room was electrified, and my parents afterwards were livid. For a period, the couple returned each week. Soon, the minister of 20 years was gone. When I started college 3 years later, I had essentially never talked to a black child. My very white, small college would offer few opportunities for that to change. But nonetheless, my eyes began to open. I read Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail and was stunned. The myths and meanness of Southern racism had stepped forward out of the white fog. Over the next 2 years, to my parents' great chagrin, I became radicalized, firmly opposed to the war in Vietnam, and deeply disturbed by America's many injustices. Looking back now, I see my social conscience as a seed long sitting underground, which, with watering and sunlight in college, sprouted into a small plant. Its subsequent growth was slow. During my 7 years of medical training, the order of the day was intense learning and emotional survival. But my exposures to all races and classes of people skyrocketed in those years, for which I'm deeply grateful. Also during those years, I saw, for the only time, Cora's 4-room shanty in a poor community, a distressing gut punch. The small Virginia town where I then settled was quaint and quirky and situated near mountains that I loved. But as the county was over 95% white, my racial horizons barely moved. Mostly I learned there about rural America's working class and its diversity. Since moving here in 2000, New Mexico's history and sociology have challenged me. Issues around ethnicity, class, and religion shredded my old black and white paradigm. Before my retirement, about a third of my patients were Hispanic and a few were Native Americans. Insights gained from them have been invaluable. Still, I struggle with some of the state's social issues, like our high rates of addiction and highway fatalities, the role of Catholicism, and justice for Native Americans. Unquestionably, that small plant seeking justice has grown explosively in our land of complexity. Since 2008, the centuries of deep injustice toward African Americans have returned to the national forefront. I've cared deeply about that, but also about universal health care, climate change, and America's extreme income inequality. Now even the survival of factual truth and the Constitution are in doubt. How does one hold it all? The protests of the past year have given me hope and trepidation. They've led me to reflect often on the path I've traveled and what the nation has yet to accomplish in addressing its racism. Here are my 4 main tentative conclusions. First, though I've left behind many of my racist thoughts and behaviors, there are many gut-level biases and fears that I know will never be eradicated. Whittling them down will be an ongoing task. Meanwhile, I can work hard against America's many racist policies and practices. More than many of us, I know their cruel roots. Second, America was built on horrible racial injustice for 178 years before there was a Constitution. 178 years. European colonists were quite willing to conquer darker-skinned people for their land and to enslave millions of others. So greed and ruthlessness are very deep in our DNA. Decency and greatness are too. But the strength of those two attributes has been far more variable over our history. All too often they get trotted out as a mere smokescreen. Third, as it slowly loses its grip on the levers of power, white America now faces a momentous decision. Will we make sure that the denial of our history stops? That the greed-driven, cruel ways of treating peoples of color become truly unacceptable? Will we lean hard into justice and decency and find a far more humane form of national greatness? Amazingly and frighteningly, the answer will be known in just 3 to 4 months. I personally am moderately confident that most of white America will do the just thing this fall. Helping to make that happen is now my urgent task, and I hope yours too. Finally, I believe many white Americans want to help stamp out racial injustice, but are held back by their fears, guilt, and shame. Some just can't find the clarity they need to get involved. To help such folks, several of us have drawn up an anti-racism pledge, an opportunity to see in one place the rationale for white involvement and valuable actions we can take. Importantly, it also offers a framework for bypassing the shame and fears. Our Social Justice Committee has recently supported distributing the pledge to all members and friends of the church. When you receive this in coming weeks, I urge you to read it carefully and consider making these commitments to yourself. Thank you.
Here in this religious community, we receive gifts that nurture body, mind, and spirit. Our offering is an opportunity to share some of what we have with the wider world. Even though we're unable to meet in person, we continue to take an online offering each week to support our community partners. Our offering recipient for the month of August is Los Alamos Family Council. The Family Council promotes educational, emotional, and social well-being through education, prevention, and counseling, and serves the Los Alamos County through their counseling center and 2 youth activity centers. Please use the link in the notes below to make a direct donation. Thank you for your generosity. May what you give bring you joy. For our closing today, I'm going to be reading a poem by John Luke Johnstone. We shall overcome. We shall overcome when we can truly celebrate the diversity of contributions and talents offered by all people. We shall overcome hatred and prejudice and oppression. When we can truly extend our hands to one another in loving acceptance, we shall overcome the past that haunts us now. Living in peace and freedom, we shall overcome the wrongs that have happened and the debts left unpaid. Let us join together in that commitment to overcome. Let us say together, Amen.
And finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh no. Talking about a revolution.